Quick one. Last video hit over 100 comments, which is absolutely mind-blowing for this channel. Let's try that again for this video. Comment down what you think about these stories, or just a hello, and the team will reply. We always reply to the comments. As always, please like and subscribe and help this channel grow. Thank you. I should have known better than to get my hopes up for a decent first date from Tinder, but I guess I was feeling particularly lonely that night and thought maybe this time would be different. Oh, how wrong I was. The second he walked through the doors of the cafe, the night took a turn for the worse. This guy looked nothing like his photos, not even close. The crisp jawline and warm smile I had seen on his profile were nowhere to be found. Instead, he had kind of a scraggly, unkempt vibe going on. His hair was disheveled and unwashed, sticking out at odd angles in a failed attempt to cover up his bald spots. I could see he was trying and failing to hide the fact that he was clearly balding. The terrible comb-over paired with a bad dye job, which was growing out at the roots, was doing him no favors. His skin was pasty and pale with visible acne scars. A wave of disappointment washed over me as he made eye contact with his dull, bloodshot eyes and shuffled over to the booth I was sitting at. I tried to have an open mind, but as he slid into the seat across from me, I couldn't help but notice the layer of cat hair covering his all-black outfit. His black t-shirt had orange and white hairs stuck all over it. Did he not even try to clean himself up a little for a first date? I discreetly picked a few orange hairs off the table, hoping our drinks would arrive quickly so I could distract myself by sipping something. The conversation was stilted right from the beginning. We truly had nothing in common, not even close. I'm really into health and fitness. I hit the gym almost every day, meal prep healthy food to stay on track with my diet, and like being active and social on the weekends. This guy made it clear pretty fast that he did none of that. He doesn't work out at all, seeming proud of the fact that he lives on frozen pizza and greasy takeout. He showed no interest in any physical activities and seemed winded just from the short walk to our table. I tried asking more questions to find some common ground, but we were total opposites. About 10 excruciatingly awkward minutes in, he spilled mustard down the front of his ill-fitting, cat hair-covered black shirt. I averted my gaze, pretending not to notice as the yellow condiment left a stark stain across his chest. Was this date actually happening? I debated making up an urgent phone call for my roommate just so I could exit early. Somehow it managed to get even worse as the date dragged on. At one point he casually mentioned how he smoked weed because of his glaucoma. I try to respond sensitively since glaucoma is actually a serious medical condition that can lead to blindness. But then he burst out laughing, spewing crumbs across the table. Admitting he doesn't really have it, he just uses that as an excuse when he gets high. I mustered a polite smile, but inside I was fuming. Joking about a disease like that is just not okay in my book. The offensive comments continued as he launched into a long-winded rant about how advanced medicine should be used to cure every disease and make people immoral. I cautiously brought up concerns about overpopulation if that were to happen, but he had an unconscionable solution: just systematically kill off the bottom third of people deemed unworthy to live. He said we could test intelligence and skills and just get rid of those who don't contribute enough to society. The way he spit it out so casually made my skin crawl. This was getting disturbing. I noticed him start to hack and cough violently, eventually spitting right onto the cafe floor every time he laughed at his own terrible jokes. It was disgusting to witness. It took everything in me not to get up and bolt for the door right then and there, but I had to keep telling myself it was almost over. I just needed to avoid reacting to anything he said or did to prevent triggering more spitting. After what felt like an eternity, I faked an incoming call and made my exit. I breathed a sigh of relief as I got into my car, beyond ecstatic the night was over. Driving home, I just shook my head in disbelief that I had wasted an evening dealing with this offensive, unhygienic creep. I couldn't believe someone could misrepresent themselves so much online and turn out to be that awful in person. It was like an SNL sketch gone wrong. The misleading photos, the lack of chemistry, the distasteful comments, all of it was such a disaster. I definitely learned my lesson about being more selective with online dating after suffering through that experience. From now on, I will be vetting profiles way more thoroughly and not just swiping right on anyone passably cute. Some red flags to look out for include sparse profiles, inconsistencies in pics, or serious personality clashes hinted at in their bio or prompts. I never would have agreed to meet that tool if I had actually looked closer first. But I guess enduring that bizarre nightmare of a date will make for a pretty hilarious story to tell my friends later, even if it was wildly uncomfortable at the time. Here's hoping the next first date goes better. I'll be sure to have a witty exit strategy planned just in case, though. I still get chills down my spine when I recall that nightmarish first date with Thomas a few years ago. We had connected online through one of those sketchy dating apps that promises to find your soulmate. And lonely at the time, I decided to give it a shot. Thomas' profile seemed decent enough. He was employed, had hobbies, and came across as a normal guy just looking for love. We exchanged messages for a week or two before deciding to meet up in person. When the day arrived, I took extra care getting ready, making sure my hair and makeup were perfect. I chose a flattering sundress and even spritzed on my favorite perfume. I wanted to make a good first impression for my mystery man. We had agreed to meet at a quaint cafe downtown that Saturday afternoon. I arrived early, too anxious to wait at home. The weather was pleasant, not too hot for midsummer. I grabbed a table outside under the shade of a big umbrella and ordered an iced tea while I waited for Thomas to show up. I sipped my cold drink and watched people strolling by on the sidewalk. Families, couples, groups of laughing teens. It was a lively Saturday afternoon downtown. I checked the time on my phone nervously. Thomas was 5 minutes late. I started thinking that maybe he had changed his mind and wasn't going to show up. My heart sank a little at the thought of being stood up. Just as I was about to give up hope, a gangly, unshaven man shuffling down the sidewalk caught my eye. He looked around uncertainly, then waved awkwardly in my direction. I realized it must be Thomas. He looked nothing like the photos on his dating profile. Those must have been at least 10 years and 50 pounds ago. Trying not to seem disappointed, I stood up with a smile to greet him. "Hi, Thomas, I'm Lucy. Nice to finally meet you." He mumbled a hello and pulled me into an uncomfortable bear hug. Okay, not great, but I would give him a chance. We both sat back down and attempted some small talk as we sipped our drinks. Thomas kept steering the conversation into very bizarre territory, like his favorite funeral traditions, taxidermy techniques, and hunting rituals. I gently suggested we change topics to something more upbeat. He seemed frustrated but agreed. I started racking my brain for an excuse to politely end this catastrophe of a date early. Thomas was droning on about his 10 cats and showing me blurry photos of them on his phone. I smiled and nodded absently, glancing around for our waiter so I could ask for the check. But before I could come up with an exit plan, Thomas suddenly asked if I'd like to continue hanging out at his place. Every alarm bell went off, but he seemed harmless, so against my better judgment I said yes. Maybe he was just really awkward and his place would be normal. As we walked to our cars, I tried to stay upbeat. Thomas drove a rusty old pickup truck piled high with junk. I followed him across town towards his neighborhood. As we got closer to his house, an increasingly foul stench began to fill my nostrils. We pulled into his dirt driveway that badly needed gravel or paving. The front porch came into view. Trash bags were piled up, flies were swarming, and the unmistakable smell of urine permeated the air. Thomas didn't seem to notice the horrific odor and marched right up the creaky steps to unlock the front door. My stomach churned as I reluctantly followed him inside. The living room was straight out of a horror movie. Dust coated every surface in a thick layer. Piles of clutter made navigation treacherous, and the sickly sweet stench of rot hung heavy. The curtains were drawn, and it took a minute for my eyes to adjust to the dim lighting. But worst of all were the taxidermied animals displayed prominently on the walls and shelves. Squirrels, rats, even a cat, their lifeless eyes seeming to follow me as I shakily sat down on a soiled floral couch. The lumpy cushions reeked of body odor, urine, and general filth. Thomas plopped down next to me on the couch, closer than I would have liked. I subtly tried to shift away from him. He babbled on about his taxidermy hobby, pointing out his favorite pieces with pride. I nodded, trying not to vomit as I imagined how he had killed and gutted these poor animals. Just then, I noticed scratching noises coming from behind a nearby closet door. Thomas explained those were the kittens, and he'd introduce us later. This had to be the worst date of my life. Just when I thought this night couldn't get more hellish, Thomas slid his clammy hand onto my thigh. I recoiled from his unwanted grasp and quickly stood up, saying I had to get home immediately to feed my fish. Thomas seemed startled and grabbed my wrist, asking me to stay for dinner at least. I yanked myself free from his sweaty grasp and rushed to the door as he called after me in protest. I jumped in my car, locking the doors immediately. My hands shook as I tried to steady my breathing. Thomas emerged from the house and knocked on my window, but I pretended not to notice and quickly backed down the driveway. I sped off, hands still trembling on the steering wheel. By the time I got home, I was a nervous wreck. I soaked in the shower for over an hour, trying in vain to scrub away the filth. In the following weeks, I became paranoid that Thomas would track me down. I deleted all my dating profiles and avoided that cafe like the plague. Every time my phone rang, my heart raced thinking it could be him. With time, the traumatic memories faded, but I'll never forget that horrific first date. My night with Thomas taught me to trust my intuition and be far more cautious when meeting strangers from the internet. A lapse in judgment nearly landed me in an unimaginable nightmare scenario. Thankfully, I escaped unscathed, but others might not be so lucky. First dates can truly be unpredictable, dangerous affairs. Now I am much more selective about who I choose to meet in person, always letting a friend know where I will be. That horrific first date could have ended so much worse, but instead it taught me to value safety above all else. Oh man, I don't think I'll ever forget that night. It was supposed to be just a normal first date. We had met on one of those dating apps a few weeks earlier and had been chatting and really hitting it off. She seemed so cool. We liked a lot of the same obscure indie bands, foreign horror films, old school video games. So when she suggested meeting up at her place for a movie night and takeout, I was thrilled. When I finally arrived at her building, an older brick walk up in a trendy neighborhood, it was already starting to get dark out. The street was lively with people heading out to bars and restaurants for the night. I double-checked the address and entered the lobby, finding her name on the directory for apartment 3E. The building seemed a little run down but charming, with its creaky wood floors and intricate antique mailbox in the lobby. I climbed 3 flights of narrow stairs lined with faded floral carpet and made my way down the hall to her apartment. Most of the doors had various decorations and welcome mats that hinted at their occupants' personalities. I smiled, noticing she had a mat printed with song lyrics by one of our shared favorite bands. I did a final breath check and smoothed my hair before knocking lightly. I heard footsteps approach before the door swung open, revealing her smiling face. She was even prettier than her pictures, with wavy brown hair, glasses, and funky vintage-inspired clothes. We exchanged slightly awkward introductions and a quick hug before she welcomed me inside. The apartment was small but bursting with personality. Indie band posters covered the walls, string lights were tangled over windows, and secondhand furniture filled the space. The aroma of vanilla candles mixed with leftovers of Chinese takeout. It was a perfectly imperfect first apartment, eclectic and cozy. Indie folk music played softly in the background, setting a mellow vibe. She gave me a quick tour around the combined living room and kitchen, apologizing for the mess. I told her not to worry about it at all. It was a lovely little place. It definitely reflected the vibe I had gotten from her online. We picked out a weird 80s horror movie to watch, and she told me to make myself at home on the thrifted velvet couch while she got us some drinks. About 20 minutes into the movie, as we were chatting and getting to know each other, I started hearing odd noises coming from other parts of the apartment. At first, I figured it was just the building settling or neighbors in the floors above us. But the noises kept happening sporadically. Heavy thuds and dragging sounds, like furniture being moved around. She didn't seem to notice, though, so I brushed it off as my imagination. The strange noises continued throughout the movie. Thumps, crashing sounds, floorboards creaking. It was hard to focus on the movie or our conversation with the constant interruptions. I kept glancing around nervously, though she still seemed oblivious. When a loud crash came from the next room over in her bedroom, she finally looked up at me wide-eyed. "What was that?" she whispered. I just shook my head and said I wasn't sure, my heart starting to race now. Another series of loud thumps, followed by shattering glass, made us both jump to our feet in alarm. "Oh my God, I think someone's in the apartment," she gasped. Adrenaline pumping through my veins, I gestured for her to stay quiet as I crept carefully toward the bedroom door. The apartment was small but cluttered, providing plenty of hiding spots if someone had broken in. I peeked cautiously into the dim bedroom, but it appeared empty at first glance. The window by fire escape was wide open, curtains blowing in the night breeze. How the hell did someone get in? My date grabbed a baseball bat she had by the couch and passed me a heavy psychology textbook to use as protection. Weapons in hand, we began searching the apartment, listening intently for any sign of the intruder. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears as we cleared the tiny galley kitchen and bathroom, finding them empty. A sudden shadow darting across the hall ahead made me pull back against the wall, clutching the textbook. my whole body tensed, ready to fight or flee if needed. The intruder seemed to be lurking between the living room and bedroom, blocking our path to the front door. I pointed for my date to follow me toward the fire escape window. It was our only way out. We crept toward the bedroom door as quietly as possible. Just as I reached for the handle, we heard fast approaching footsteps from inside the room. My date's eyes widened in panic as she turned to run back down the hall, but it was too late. The bedroom door flung open violently, revealing a figure clad in black with a masked face. My date screamed as I swung the heavy textbook at the intruder with all my strength. They staggered back with a grunt as I pulled my date behind me and yelled for her to run to the front door. We sprinted through the hallway, the intruder's enraged shouts following close behind. My heart felt like it was going to pound right out of my chest. My date reached the door first, fumbling to unlock the chain and deadbolts with shaking hands. We could hear the intruder gaining on us, heavy boots thudding against the creaky wooden floors. Finally, my date got the door open, and we stumbled out into the hall together, slamming the door shut behind us. We rushed for the stairwell exit, nearly tumbling down the stairs as we heard the intruder barrel into the locked door with a bang. Other residents were emerging from their units to see what the commotion was, but we didn't stop to explain. We burst out of the lobby doors onto the crowded city sidewalk, both breathing hard and shaking with adrenaline. My date immediately pulled out her phone with trembling hands to call the cops. Within minutes, we could hear police sirens wailing nearby, hitting louder and closer. An officer on foot arrived first, rushing over to check if we were okay as we gave a terrified recap of what happened. Moments later, several police cruisers pulled up with lights flashing and officers stormed into the building, guns drawn. The next while was a blur of answering questions, giving statements, waiting anxiously to see if they would catch the intruder. From what the police told us afterwards, the intruder escaped out the fire escape before they arrived, but they were actively investigating. My date and I sat in shock on the curb, trying to process the terrifying ordeal we had just narrowly survived. As the adrenaline wore off, we began to replay every detail, wondering how things might have ended differently if we hadn't acted fast. It was also surreal. Not at all how I expected this first date to go. After the police cleared out and the building manager secured the damaged apartment, I offered to pay for my rattled date to stay in a hotel for the night. Neither of us felt safe returning yet. We walked together quietly to a nearby hotel, both lost in thought, trying to wrap our heads around the crazy, traumatic night. It would certainly make for an unforgettable story of how we first met. A baptism by fire, so to speak. What didn't kill us only made us stronger, or in this case, brought us together. I was feeling a mix of excitement and nerves as I got ready for my first date with Alina that night. We had matched on an online dating app a few weeks prior, had really hit it off chatting and texting. She was witty, kind-hearted, and seemed genuinely interested in me as a person. I felt like we had the potential to have something real, and I was hoping this first date would confirm the spark I sensed was there between us. I put extra care into choosing my outfit, wanting to look nice but still casual since we were just meeting at a bar for drinks. I slipped on my favorite dark jeans, a gray V-necked t-shirt, and my lucky brown leather jacket. I sprayed on a bit of cologne, checked myself in the mirror, and headed out, arrived early so I could grab us a good table. The bar was dimly lit, lively but not too crowded on this Thursday night. I scouted out a high-top table off to the side, where we'd be able to hear each other talk without shouting over the music. I ordered a beer to try and calm the flutters in my stomach. I checked the time, took a deep breath, and reminded myself to play it cool. Right on time, I saw Lena walk through the front entrance, peering around curiously until she spotted me smiling and waving her over. She looked just as pretty as her photos, with warm brown eyes and curly chestnut hair framing her heart-shaped face. She was petite, wearing an ivory lace blouse and jeans, small gold hoop earrings glinting in the low light. "Hi there, so great to finally meet you," she said brightly as we shared an awkward first-date hug. Her smile lit up her whole face. We settled into our chairs across from one another. "I'm really glad we could make this work. I've been looking forward to it," I told her sincerely. The conversation flowed easily right off the bat. I learned she taught second grade at an elementary school nearby, and the passion she felt for her students was obvious in the way her face lit up describing them. She told me how rewarding but exhausting it could be, coming home completely depleted some days. In turn, I told her about my job doing accounting for a tech company. I worried it sounded monotonous compared to her lively classroom stories, but she asked thoughtful questions, seeming genuinely interested in the ins and outs of my corporate finance work. We also bonded over shared interests like hiking, cooking, and our mutual love of dogs. She showed me cute photos of her golden retriever while I scrolled through pictures of my pit mix pup. I was really struck by how in sync our senses of humor were, laughing easily at each other's jokes. I felt at ease with her, like we just clicked and the conversation flowed naturally. After about an hour, though, I noticed Alina's demeanor suddenly shift. Her eyes drifted to something behind me and her body tensed up. She had a look of unease tinged with fear written across her face. I turned to see what had caused such a reaction and immediately spotted the reason. A very tall, broad-shouldered man with a menacing glare was approaching our table, seemingly zeroed in on Alina. Before he even opened his mouth, I could sense the volatile energy radiating off of him. Then he spoke, and his aggressive tone made it click. This must be the abusive, stalker ex-boyfriend Alina had confided in me about. The one who continued hounding her against her will after their breakup, calling obsessively and refusing to move on. My heart sank realizing our nice evening was about to take a nightmarish turn with this man's unwelcome arrival. He came right up to our table, posture rigid and looming as he shouted angrily at Alina. "Who's this guy you're with, huh? You think you can just go on dates with random men behind my back?" Alina pleaded with him to leave us alone, to just go and stop tormenting her, but her requests only seemed to fuel his fury. Other patrons began to stare, looking concerned but apparently unwilling to intervene in the tense confrontation unfolding. I tried appealing to the man's rational side, asking him as calmly as I could to take a breath and reconsider this behavior, but it was clear he was operating purely on obsessive rage. He began threatening us both, spewing vitriolic insults at me and Alina for daring to meet up. I could see his volatility escalating fast, so I stood it and told him firmly he needed to leave, hoping a strong stance might get through to him. But it had the opposite effect. He perceived me as a threat and shoved me hard in the chest, causing me to stumble backwards. Watching him then reach into his jacket and produce a switchblade filled me with terror. This unstable, rejected man was out for blood and vengeance. As he lunged toward Alina, blade glinting under the bar lights, every protective instinct inside me ignited. I acted on pure adrenaline, throwing myself between them to shield her from harm. We grappled intensely, me using all my strength to grasp his knife hand, prying at his clenched fingers. I finally wrenched the weapon free, kicking it away across the floor. A feral yell escaped the man's mouth, realizing he'd lost his grip on the blade. Before he could make another move, I shoved him back forcefully. Stumbling, staring at me with vengeful eyes, he seemed to reconsider with the knife now gone. He turned and stormed out of the bar into the night. Alina was sobbing, her body racked by shaking from the traumatic encounter. I enveloped her in a hug, feeling her rapid heartbeat and mine both pounding. The bartender had watched it unfold and now rushed over asking if he should call the police. I declined for the moment, not wanting to pull shell-shocked Alina into a lengthy, invasive police investigation right now. She had endured enough fresh torment this evening already. I helped Alina into her coat and guided her out to the parking lot, keeping an eye out for any sign of the bitter ex lingering nearby. Safely in my car, I cranked the heat to combat her fear. I drove her back to her apartment building, repeatedly asking if she was okay and assuring her the worst was over. Inside her cozy but sparse living room, the adrenaline wore off and she broke down into sobs once more. I held her as she cried it out, wishing I could absorb all the pain and fear that man had inflicted. Eventually, the tears slowed. I handed Alina tissues and a glass of water, feeling powerless to do anything more to console her. Reluctantly, I offered to leave so she could get some rest, worried about her being alone, but not wanting to overstep on this first date turned sour. She assured me she'd be all right, and promised to call if she needed anything at all. I made sure she had my number on speed dial before heading out into the now gloomy night. Driving home, I replayed it all in my mind, that tranquil first date ambience shattered by the jarring entrance of Alina's menacing ex. I feared he was still lurking out there, obsessed with controlling her life. I resolved to check on Alina every day, encourage her to seek a restraining order if necessary, and not let this evil from her past destroy a relationship we were just starting to build. I had been chatting online with James for a few weeks leading up to our first date, and there was definitely a spark between us right from the start. We messaged each other every day, always finding something new to talk about, from our favorite movies and TV shows to childhood memories and future dreams. James had such a warm, friendly way about him even over text. I couldn't wait to meet him in person to see if we had as much chemistry face-to-face as we did digitally. After much flirty build-up, James finally asked me out on a proper first date to dinner downtown. I enthusiastically said yes, then promptly spiraled into total outfit panic trying to find the perfect dress to wear. I must have tried on 20 different combinations from my closet, seeking that ideal blend of casual yet cute. I settled on a floral sundress with a ruffled hem that hit just above my knees, pairing it with simple tan sandals. I styled my long brown hair in soft waves and did my makeup with a delicate hand. As I checked myself in the mirror one last time, I felt a flutter of anticipation in my stomach for the night ahead. Right on time, I saw James pull up outside my apartment building in a shiny blue sedan. I checked my reflection in the window before heading out to meet him. James stepped out of the car and greeted me with a warm, slightly nervous smile that put me instantly at ease. He looked just as handsome as in his photos, with kind brown eyes and close-cropped hair. James complimented my dress as he opened the passenger door for me. "You look beautiful," he said sincerely. I thanked him, feeling my cheeks flush pink. His thoughtfulness and chivalry continued as we drove to the restaurant, with James asking how my week had been and sharing funny work stories that made me laugh out loud. We arrived downtown on a busy Saturday night, the sidewalks crowded with couples headed to dinner and groups of friends spilling out of bars. James clasped my hand protectively as he led us towards the trendy sushi restaurant he had picked. I noticed him hold the door and gently place his other hand on my lower back as we entered the sleek, modern space. The restaurant's metal accents and techno music screamed of trying too hard to be hip, which wasn't really my taste. But I tried to keep an open mind since James had chosen it. We were promptly seated by the stone-faced host at a small table on the back wall. The dim lighting and ambient electronica made conversation challenging at first, but James' warm presence and attentiveness soon made me forget about the pretentious atmosphere. We started with edamame and miso soup, though I was too giddy and nervous to eat much. I peppered James with questions about his interests, favorite books, and bucket list travel goals as I picked at the edamame shells. When our server returned, James suggested we do the omakase, letting the chef select specialty pieces for us. My minimal experience with sushi made me hesitant, but I didn't want James to think I was boring or picky on our first date. So I smiled and agreed to the chef's choice platter. An elaborate array of sliced fish and ornately decorated rolls arrived, beautifully presented with flowering garnishes. I slowly tried each piece using my chopsticks, attempting to mirror James' graceful technique. The flavors were all very bold and brenny, the textures slick and slimy. I washed down each bite with gulps of green tea, hoping to mask my distaste. James seemed totally at ease, commenting on the quality and freshness as he enthusiastically devoured piece after piece. So I never let on that the pungent raw fish was making my stomach turn somersaults. After we made it through the first sizable platter, the chef presented another round of rolls and nigiri. By now the strong flavors had really started to disagree with my stomach, but James showed no sign of slowing down. Wanting desperately to impress him, I forced myself to keep up. I nibbled each piece as daintily as I could manage, all while sipping water and green tea to calm my churning insides. About halfway through the second platter, James abruptly stood up with his hand over his mouth and rushed towards the restrooms in back. I sat staring down at the dismembered sushi rolls, unsure what had just happened. When James returned, he bashfully revealed that he doesn't actually enjoy sushi much either. He picked this trendy restaurant hoping to impress me with his sophisticated palate. But clearly the heaping piles of raw fish had not agreed with him. I couldn't help but laugh with relief. We had both suffered through sushi that evening, trying too hard to impress each other. The mutual awkwardness dissipated as we chatted and laughed about our botched attempts at seeming refined. I assured an embarrassed James not to worry. I was just thrilled to spend time together. Despite the food mishaps, James kindly paid the entire bill, even leaving a generous tip for our stoic waiter. We decided to take a stroll through a nearby park to help settle our stomachs. The fresh night air and James' warm company were just what I needed to start feeling normal again. As we walked hand in hand under the moonlight, any lingering weirdness from dinner faded away. James dropped me home with a promise to see me again soon for a redo date. After such an eventful and amusing first date, I had no doubt we would have many more adventures to come. I was bubbling over with excitement when my childhood crush asked me out on a date. He had been my secret admirer since elementary school, and I was over the moon when he called me out of the blue and invited me to the arcade. I had been fantasizing about this moment for years, picturing us strolling hand in hand, playing games, and realizing we were perfect for each other. After screaming to my best friend on the phone for nearly 2 hours about the upcoming date, I agonized over planning my outfit for the next day. I must have tried on 10 different combinations before deciding on my cutest pair of jeans, a flattering floral top that showed just a hint of cleavage, and styling my hair in loose, touchable curls. A swipe of blush to give my cheeks a natural glow and a coat of my favorite peach lip gloss completed the look. I was going for a casual yet hot vibe. Gazing at my reflection, I felt confident in my outfit choice and absolutely ready for this long-awaited first date. When Saturday afternoon finally arrived, I drove to the mall arcade with butterflies swirling in my stomach. Part of me wondered if this was all too good to be true. I spotted him waiting near the entrance, shifting his weight between feet and running his hand through his hair compulsively. We exchanged stiff pleasantries about the weather and finals week before heading inside. Immediately, his behavior struck me as erratic. He was practically shoving each word, despite the fact that the arcade was nearly empty on this weekday afternoon. A nervous, frenetic energy radiated off of him as he yanked me from game to game, barely giving me a chance to look at the game options before pulling me to the next one. Several times he tightly grabbed my wrist or forearm when leading me through the arcade, and he stood uncomfortably close to me in line for the coin exchange. I let out an awkward laugh and tried to subtly lean away or slide my arm from his grip, but the uncomfortable closeness and lack of personal space continued. At the skee ball lanes, his behavior grew even more concerning. He violently hurled each ball, with seemingly no intention of rolling it smoothly to aim for the point rings. The loud crashes as the balls aggressively bounced down the lane made me flinch every time. I gently suggested trying for more control and finesse instead of brute force, but my advice went ignored each time as he launched another ball with reckless abandon. After about an hour of being dragged around the arcade in his overstimulated state, I started trying to think of polite ways I could end this exhausting date early. Things went from bad to worse when we walked by a young boy, no more than 7 years old, struggling to see over the counter at the prized pickup area. Without warning or provocation, my date aggressively hip-checked the child out of his way so he could cut in front of him and get to the counter first. Horrified at his unnecessary aggressive behavior toward the child, I stated firmly that we should leave the arcade immediately. As we walked through the mall to the parking lot, he made a few crass comments about other people's appearances that made me extremely uncomfortable. I became even more eager to exit this disastrous date as soon as humanly possible. Sitting in my car, I felt rattled and unsettled by the experience. Where was the sweet, thoughtful person I had imagined asking me deep questions and winning me over with his charm? The person I had been with in the arcade acted like an overgrown bully, oblivious to basic manners and common decency. Perhaps he had just been very anxious for our big first date and was handling it poorly, or maybe this loud, hyper-insensitive persona was his true self emerging. Whatever the reasons, I no longer had any interest in dating someone who acted so recklessly and inappropriately. The romantic fantasies I'd had about us being the perfect, destined couple were effectively shattered by his actions today. In a way, I feel grateful that I finally went on an actual date with him instead of just daydreaming what if for years. The reality of his behavior was totally different than the considerate, mature partner I had imagined. At least now I know with certainty that we are completely incompatible, no matter how long I had a crush on him. Although the date was an utter catastrophe, it provided some valuable lessons. I now know which behaviors I refuse to accept from a potential partner under any circumstances. I also understand the importance of keeping my expectations realistic when getting to know someone, instead of inflating their positive qualities in my head. Dating requires genuinely getting to know the real person, not just admiring them from afar. My first date will certainly go down in history as a total disaster. But me and my friends will surely get some laughs out of the story of my childhood crush revealing himself to be an oblivious nightmare. Even though it was nothing like the fairy tale scenario I'd envisioned, getting to see the truth versus my fantasy helped me learn crucial things about relationships. In that sense, our awful first date was almost worthwhile for providing that eye-opening perspective. Here's hoping my next first date goes better than my childhood fantasy turned to creepy reality. I was buzzing with eager anticipation for my first date with Jake. We had really hit it off when we met a few weeks ago at my friend Stacy's birthday party. I still remember how we spent over an hour chatting by the snack table, lost in conversation. Jake was so easy to talk to, funny and charming. When he asked me out on a proper date, I immediately said yes without hesitation. We decided to keep things casual for a first date and planned a picnic at Thompson Park. I used to go there all the time as a kid and thought it would be a nice, relaxed setting to get to know each other better. The week leading up to our date dragged on slowly. I caught myself daydreaming about Jake throughout my work days, reminiscing about our great conversation at the party and picturing his warm smile. I wondered if he was just as excited for our date as I was. My friends laughed at how I couldn't stop gushing about Jake and our upcoming plans. Finally, the big day arrived. I was a bundle of excitement and nerves as I tried to figure out what to wear. I must have tried on 6 different outfit combinations for my closet, wanting to look cute but not like I was trying too hard. I finally decided on my favorite pair of light wash skinny jeans, a floral tank top and brown sandals. I knew the jeans flattered my legs and the pinks and purples of the floral pattern matched my complexion nicely. For my hair, I opted to style it in loose natural waves and applied a touch of makeup with light pink lip gloss. I gave myself one final check in the mirror before packing snacks to bring in a picnic basket. I included things like fresh strawberries, gooey chocolate chip cookies, and ham and cheese sandwiches. With everything ready, I took a deep breath, feeling both thrilled and anxious, and headed out the door. As I drove to Thompson Park, I couldn't stop smiling. The weather was perfect, sunny with just a few puffy white clouds. I cranked up the volume on the radio and sang along, trying to channel my nervous energy. As I pulled into the parking lot, I immediately spotted Jake's older model blue Honda Civic. My stomach flipped excitedly knowing he had already arrived. We exchanged an awkward but sweet first date hug before deciding on a grassy spot to set up our picnic. Jake had brought along a classic red and white checkered blanket which he gallantly spread out under a giant sprawling oak tree. It was the perfect amount of shade for a summer day. I unpacked the snacks I had brought along with some lemonade and water bottles. Jake also contributed some potato chips, grapes, and pretzel breadsticks. Our conversation picked up right where it left off at the party without missing a beat. I was again struck by how kind, intelligent, and funny Jake was. We discovered we shared interests like hiking local trails, watching action movies, and a love of pasta and Italian food. Jake regaled me with funny stories about his 3 mischievous cats that had me giggling throughout our lunch. When we had finished eating, we laid back comfortably on the blanket and pointed out shapes in the fluffy white clouds drifting overhead. Everything was going so well. With his great sense of humor and our lively discussion, I was really feeling hopeful that Jake could be someone I wanted to keep seeing. But after a short lull in conversation, things took an abrupt, bizarre turn. Jake suddenly sat up with an eager look in his eyes and said he had a surprise for me. I watched curiously as he reached into his backpack and pulled out a small plastic container. With growing excitement, he told me it was his favorite snack, worms. Big, fat, juicy worms were writhing around inside the container. Jake had a huge grin on his face as he tried to hand me a worm he had pinched between his fingers. "Here, try one," he said eagerly. I was completely horrified and stunned. Was this some kind of prank? But Jake's face showed he truly wanted me to eat a raw worm straight from the container and was waiting expectantly to see my reaction. I somehow managed to politely decline his offer, trying to hide my disgust as I explained that I just don't think I could bring myself to willingly eat a worm. Jake's face fell in disappointment. But why not? He whined. They're so tasty and nutritious. To my shock and revulsion, he then eagerly popped the worm into his own mouth, chewed it up with a smile, and swallowed it down. The look of complete satisfaction on his face was almost more than I could handle. I took some deep breaths, trying to regain my composure and hide how much this had disturbed me. Maybe this was just a misguided attempt from Jake to generously share something he enjoyed. I gently explained that most people don't see worms as food, and I was very uncomfortable with the idea of eating them. I tried to be sensitive, but the appeal was completely lost on me. Jake said he understood my perspective, but I noticed him eyeing the container of worms longingly. I quickly suggested we start packing our picnic to shift his focus. As we folded up the blanket and repacked the basket, an awkward tension hung in the air. The easy rapport of our earlier conversation had completely fizzled out. On the quiet walk back to our cars, Jake brought up the worm incident again. He gently explained this was not just some oddball prank. He has genuinely loved eating worms ever since he was a little kid. The way he described their taste made it clear he truly saw them as a tasty snack. I gave polite nods while internally cringing at the thought. We exchanged an awkward, brief hug before saying goodbye by our cars. On the drive home, I felt perplexed by the dramatic turn the day had taken. Up until the worm surprise, I was having such a great time getting to know Jake. But now uncertainty had crept in about whether we were ultimately compatible. Could I really see myself dating someone with such an intensely eccentric taste for worms? A new taste can vary wildly, but this felt beyond just a simple difference of opinion. Over the next few days, I found myself constantly replaying the bizarre worm incident in my mind. I wondered if I had reacted badly or hurt Jake's feelings. A part of me was still intrigued by how well we had hit it off before. I debated whether I should give Jake another chance or just accept we were too different. In the end, the worm quirk was just too much for me to overlook. As nice as Jake was, I couldn't see our relationship progressing with such a major lifestyle difference. I'd never reached out for a second date, and Jake didn't contact me again either. Probably for the best that we move on and chalk it up to an amusing first date story, worms and all. I had been chatting with John online for a few weeks after meeting him on a dating app. He seemed really funny, smart, and sweet in our messages. I felt like we clicked right away, talking about our favorite books, movies, interests, and more. When he finally asked me out on a real date, I was thrilled and immediately said yes. We decided to go to this new Korean barbecue restaurant downtown that had gotten great reviews. I spent all day Sunday getting ready, nervously trying on every cute dress in my closet. I wanted to look perfect, but not like I was trying too hard. I finally settled on a floral sundress with tan wedges, keeping the outfit casual but fun. I did more makeup than usual, making sure my eyes popped. I styled my hair in soft curls and spritzed on my favorite peach perfume. When I got to the restaurant, I gave my name for the reservation, and the hostess led me to a small two-person table. I ordered a glass of white wine to calm my nerves and sipped it slowly, checking my phone every 2 minutes. John walked in right on time, just as handsome as his photos with dark hair, broad shoulders, and a warm smile. I waved eagerly when I saw him, and he came over to greet me. We hugged briefly, and he complimented how nice I looked. The conversation flowed easily as we discussed our weeks over the menus. When the waiter came by, John suggested ordering a bunch of dishes to share so we could try everything. He proceeded to order plate after plate: beef bulgogi, spicy pork belly, chicken skewers, bibimbap, japchae noodles, kimchi pancakes, shrimp tempura. I tried not to show my surprise as the order grew, but figured he wanted us to fully experience the cuisine. However, when the waiter's eyes widened at the lengthy order totaling over $500, I laughed anxiously and made a joke while hoping we were hungry. But John simply waved it off and told the waiter to bring the whole spread. I took a big gulp of wine, wondering if John was trying to show off. Despite my reservations, any awkwardness disappeared when the food arrived. Everything was absolutely delicious, and John and I had such an easy rapport. We realized we both loved skiing, Game of Thrones, and traveling to tropical places. He made me laugh with funny work stories and listened intently when I talked. I was really enjoying his company. About halfway through the multiple courses, right as I was telling him about my crazy coworker Tina, John's phone started buzzing. He looked down and said it was his boss calling him. I told him no problem, go ahead and take it. He answered with a serious look, standing up from the table and walking a few steps away for privacy. After a minute, he returned, mouthing 1 sec, and heading toward the door to keep talking. I nibbled on some bulgogi and watched him pacing outside the front windows, clearly in a serious chat. After 5 minutes passed, then 10, I started to feel awkward sitting alone with all the food. I saw nearby tables whispering and glancing at John's empty seat. At 15 minutes, the waiter came by, looking concerned, and asked if he could box up the uneaten courses. I asked for the check, trying to hide my embarrassment. When the letter folder arrived, I opened it expecting maybe $150 for our share so far. But my heart sank when it totaled over $500. I only had $80 in cash on me. The waiter must have sensed my panic because he leaned in and discreetly offered to work something out since my date had disappeared. I thanked him profusely, gathered my things, and hurried out, face burning in humiliation. I raced to my car, hearing the hostess calling out behind me but not stopping. My mind was swirling, replaying it all. Why had John ordered so extravagantly and then stuck me with a bill? Was it all a scam? Should I have seen red flags earlier? I felt so foolish and confused. Driving home, I listened to empowering music to stop tears. Later that night, John sent a short text simply saying something came up at work, my apologies. No real explanation or offer to pay me back. I never heard from him again after that. I told my friends the whole crazy story the next day over brunch. They were shocked and angry on my behalf, calling John every name in the book. I tried to play it cool, saying it would make for a funny worst first date story one day. But truthfully, I was sad and embarrassed about letting myself be treated so poorly. In the end, though, it was a valuable lesson about moving too fast with online strangers. I definitely needed to be more cautious. After the sting wore off, I did start to see the humor in getting stuck with such an astronomical bill. At least it happened early before I got emotionally invested. Silver linings, I suppose, though it may be a while before I agree to any more fancy dinner dates with men I barely know. Thanks for listening in. If you like these stories and want to hear more, then please subscribe and like and support this new channel. We have more stories for you to listen to.